Yeah, and we're live. There's John.
What's happening, man?
How you doing? Happy Friday.
Thank you. Appreciate Happy Friday to y'all as well. Just unearthing myself after being out for a couple weeks, but I know we got some exciting things to talk about, man. It's great to be back. Did you get a haircut? You look good. What's going on, man?
Me, a
Yeah.
little bit of razzle dazzle over here. Somebody lovingly told me I shaved some years off, but I'm not sure that happened.
Oh,
But yeah, little
try
beard.
to find a way to do that myself, man.
Yeah. Lots of changes and things happening over here, but we'll talk about that later. The interesting thing, what's going on, what we're talking about right now, is the House and the More Act. And so, we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, glad you're back, John. It's been a while. Jason's been stepping in and helping me not sit here and stare at the screen and just wait for comments to show up. So, in addition to being live on YouTube right now, we have gone live on our TikTok too. So we've got some people that are going to be joining from there. Currently, we don't have a moderator for everyone watching on TikTok. We don't have a moderator, so just to let you know in the comments, no one's going to be getting back to you. But for YouTube, hey, we're here for you, and we'll be getting to the comments here in a little bit. But John, you want to tell us a little bit about Spanibus? Just I won't pry into the personal stuff, but if it's cannabis related, it's ours to know, right?
Totally. Absolutely. No, I mean, honestly, I'm a pretty open book with a lot of it. Spanibus was very cool. I feel like I'm someone that spent a lot of time understanding the North American cannabis scene, especially given the last couple of years. And that was my first real exposure to the European cannabis scene. And it was really cool. There's a lot of similarities, some very cool differences as well, too. And I think it's like very similar to how things are unique in a state by state environment in the US. And in Canada, even provincially for that matter.
Right.
It's similar over there too. Like, for example, in Spain, you can only consume cannabis like legally, right, in the social club setting, right? Whereas like places like Portugal, drugs have been decriminalized and really all types of drugs since like 2001, but there's no legal cannabis program, right? So like it's very interesting to see like how those have started to kind of move into different like areas and how they're kind of evolving. And so just kind of being front seat to that was rad, man. It was a great time.
Nice.
Totally.
Well, and seeing a little bit about how it got decriminalized with no legal pasture, and that's literally what's going on right now in the House and with the passing of the More Act and what's going on here. And I was reading it earlier. Just to jump right into it is as marijuana puts it, it's the second time this is passed, right?
Yeah.
And right now we're looking at this as what the Democratic Party wants as the precursor to the Safe Banking Act. So right now we've got a lot of momentum. We've been talking about this for a while. There's a lot of people who are behind this, but there's this egregious tax. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on the other side of this with Schumer and that kind of stuff. The More Act just passed today, second time. It's momentous. It really is. What does it mean to you, John? What do you think about that?
For me, I'm truly keep my fingers crossed that this time it means that there's going to be some more widely adopted views from the Senate side of things. So we'll keep our fingers crossed there, obviously. But it's progress, right? At the end of the day, there's been a lot. Things can change folks' mind over periods of time from the last time the More Act passed. I think it was like, what was it, 220 to 204? If I'm misstating that, I think that was what the vote was. And it's exciting to see that we're not really losing ground in that conversation, right? It's like we're here, we're talking about it. It's going to be a conversation that's not going away. And so I hope that that's spurring the conversation internally with other branches, obviously like the Senate, that are going to like take a more serious look at it and understand like in all the battles that we're fighting right now, both, foreign and domestic, is this really something that we want to keep digging our heels on, and what's our resourcing looking like in preventing this from happening? And like, I think it's just like, I hate to say like the elementary, like the old, like make a pros and cons chart, but I think the pros far outweigh the cons at this point. There's not really a good argument. And you hear me say that a lot, but I just don't, it's becoming almost undeniable. What about yourself? What do you think?
Right. Well, I'd like to throw it over to Jason's way real quick here.
Yeah.
And see what do you think, Jason?
No, I agree. it's really a pros and cons situation. That's where they're kind of debating, but a lot of the cons don't really kind of make sense. I know one of the um the representative from Oregon was saying that passing this or having it incomplete is going to force the cartels to have an upper hand and things like that. And I guess they're supposedly struggling with local citizens kind of being shoved around by the cartels. But in response to that, they said that literally the monopoly that the cartels have will be eliminated instantly when it's federally passed. So it's there's ways to look at both sides, and regardless, if it becomes legalized and everybody has access to it, I mean, where's the alcohol cartels? It's it's kind of like it's going to be a lot more. There is definitely going to have some regulation to make things run smoothly, but a lot of the negatives don't really make 100% sense. If you kind of look at it in a different light, they really don't exist. So it's mostly all positive, I think.
Absolutely. Well, and like you said, where are the moonshiners anymore, right? There's people doing it on small scale and that kind of thing, but it boils down to in legal markets where there's legal trades made, alcohol is highly regulated, and ultimately you have public safety involved, and that's about it. Otherwise, you can go to the store and buy as much as you want. You can do with it as you please. Really, like you said, at this juncture, a lot of what they're saying, it boils down to antiquated thoughts, marijuana madness, and realistically, I would say Oregon, they're going through a lot, just as we are in Southern California. With there's a lot of organized crime going on. It grows and that kind of stuff and whatnot. And it's because of it being in the rural areas and tough to get to areas, and plus the nature of it is you got to commit a crime to get in trouble for one. So law enforcement lets a lot of the stuff happen. Really, Oregon and parts of California, they've been overrun with this, and really that's why they might have that train of thought right now. But overall, if it becomes federally legal or decriminalized, the feds are going to have a different stance on it, and just like they did prior in Oregon, they'll declare a state of emergency, and imagine they'll be getting outside help rather than having their understaffed sheriff's department over there on the coast try to deal with all this kind of stuff. But again, back to the MORE Act passing, this is something that it lends to, it's kind of like storming the castle, right? You're down there, you're crossing the moat, you got the drawbridge down, and now you're just trying to bang away at the door with it. And this is another set of circumstances where you're getting people to talk about it on the floor, and you're getting people to sound silly, and then you're getting people that get sound points across, and it's really a big deal. I think in this, does it pass the next level? Oh, I'm glad that they don't have bets on. Well, I don't know. Maybe they have the bets on this in Vegas. I wouldn't bet on it. Either way, it's a tough bet to go.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as we continue, and Jason made some good points there. Nothing is going to fully eradicate illegal or illicit activities, right? And that's just like, truth be told, like it just won't happen to where it's all there's still people that make bootleg liquor in their garage, right? And I think an expectation to like set with the general public is, in the unlikely scenario that we do get there, and not to be negative, but like just knowing what I know to understand about the current situation, it's like, even if when they do pass this, right, we're looking at a couple years until everything's implemented from like a federal level and like a programmatic standpoint. So I'm interested to see like what type of timeline and what the focus is beyond that, right? So let's say we pass it, there still has to be resources committed to like writing a policy that's agreed upon and et cetera. And so like, and then implementing that policy, setting the go live dates. Very curious to see how that goes as well too. There's a lot of moving parts, but it all really boils down to progress, in my opinion, at least. But we'll see.
Right. Well, with this, it comes that the decriminalization aspect of it, and then allowing for the state's rights to put in patient grows versus recreational grows, that kind of stuff for people to grow their own. Like you said, I mean, home brewery is actually a whole thing. It's not just about moonshiners anymore, even though there's people still doing that. And
Sure.
it's not on a level that they're running around forming task force for it. Um, but people like making their own beer, and they make some good home brews and that kind of thing. I think essentially this starts to clear that path for it, depending upon the state's ability to basically hinder that, right? And or implement something that allows for their population to do home grows and do that kind of thing. And all of a sudden it becomes a pastime and a hobby for certain people, as long as you can't get in trouble for it, right?
Sure. Yep.
So
it all starts with getting people out of prison first, right? It's like I've been excited to see some of the newer on the state and local level, like policies that are being pushed that are giving social equity opportunities to folks that have been actually negatively impacted by, as opposed to it's going one level deeper than underrepresented groups, which is exciting to see, because it's like there's the addressing where it's at today and addressing the harm that it's caused with the war on drugs indefinitely over the last the amount of time that it's been going on. So like that's something that I think has me more optimistic than just about anything, for sure.
Well, and I know your stance there, and Jason, I'd love to have you weigh in on this afterwards. But I know with Dutchy and your active stance with Dutchy, you guys have been doing a lot with 40 Tons, with Last Prisoner Project, with USCC, with Steve Hawkins and fellow to make sure that this happens that way. For the listeners, not so much for our discussion, but for those listening out there, what does the MORE Act do to help push that forward, that agenda forward of getting the people out before all of a sudden there's lots of people profiting beyond where it's at right now?
The obvious things, right? And all the things that we had just mentioned, it just supplements. There's a lot of really strong efforts, like you just mentioned, several of them right there between like Last Prisoner and 40 Tons and USCC that are pushing the right things forward. It supplements a lot of effort that's gone into, like, there's a lot of legwork that goes into changing things on a local level. And like a lot of those folks are focused equal parts federally and locally. I think it's going to validate a lot of efforts and time and resources spent up to this point, which is going to ultimately amplify the impact that those groups are making on the current situation as it stands today. So it's all good things in terms of like what the macro humane goal of all of this really is. And so I couldn't be more excited about that particular angle of it. And I wish that, it seems like they're starting to talk about it more at the federal level as that being the driving factor, but like that's the most important issue, right? It's not taxes. It's not, bailing ourselves out of a recession, right? I mean, sure, those are all like nice byproducts of the fastest growing vertical, since the textile industry, right? But then it's like, it's the idea that we're having an opportunity to positively impact so many lives as an industry in a time that there's not a lot of positive things to talk about. And that is, to me, just a massive, massive thing.
Right. Well, last week we were talking about, and from this standpoint and us being part of the industry, and, I know you came from a traditional job prior to Dutchy and that kind of stuff, but cannabis has always been a part of your life. And we have some things that are near and dear to us in this fight, but when it comes down to the hindrances here, what could stand in the way? And I want to present this to Jason first, just because, talk about from the traditional markets aspect. We talked about this a little bit last week, but now we're here. The votes happened. It's passed the House. We're on to the next one. Traditional market wise, coming from the outside point of view, you're in cannabis for the last few years plus, and you've got this point of view. Who's hindering us right now, Jason, do you think? And who's trying to stop this from happening?
There's a lot of big money players out there, I think, and we talked about this because cannabis has so many applications, especially if you start including the hemp side of it, right? All the way from textiles to pharmaceuticals to the alcohol industry we talked about is very invested because they want to know how much is it going to affect their sales when cannabis is legalized. So there's a lot of big money players out there. I think that's a roadblock for sure. They're either going to try to jump in and swoop up as much as they can to try to insert themselves in the industry so they don't lose revenue, or they're going to try to really, try to block it so like their bottom line's not going to be affected. I think. But I have another question for you guys, just on a brand standpoint, because this is kind of unprecedented, because cannabis is a unique product where it's literally a plant, right? It's not, when we talk about alcohol, we talk about the craft industry and people creating moonshine in their tub and stuff like that, but realistically, people are a little hesitant to drink stuff out of a tub normally, right? And then so they have these craft kits and stuff like that too. But cannabis is a little, I would say, even though there is an art to it to do it well, but it's a little simpler, I would say, to grow yourself and dry and smoke and things like that. So if it's legalized and people are not afraid of, like, getting raided or whatever they're afraid of, or just being looked down upon, if it's a normal thing, how much do you think it'll affect just, flower sales in general? I mean, I know different products, but like flower sales, if anybody could just kind of grow it and do it themselves, and more people are, everybody will have a friend that knows how to do it and get product from them or whatever. Do you think it's going to be affecting the legal market in any way?
No, not on my end. And honestly, I would, again, I'm a bougie cannabis snob, so take this with a grain of salt. I would probably respectfully disagree that beer and cannabis are similar in terms of like growing or brewing your own, only because in the cannabis process, right? Like when you're brewing beer, like it's fermenting, it's fermenting, right? That's like the last stage, and then it's there throughout. Whereas like with cannabis, there's environmental things you have to consider. You're constantly tending to those plants every day. You're flipping them from veg to flower. You have to kind of know what you're doing. And all that being said, your answer to those points is still the same. You're right. I don't think it's going to impact the legal market, because ultimately, like, people that brew their own beer, it's not like they don't go buy beer at the store, right? And I also think, like, from what this does, like the home grow is going to probably, in terms of like the medicinal purposes and the medicinal value of the plant, is where you're going to see the biggest impact there. Because ultimately then folks that are growing it for medicine, it's obviously far more important than just like a social smoker, right? Because there's obviously a need from like a health standpoint there. That's going to help the medical patient group of that tremendously. In terms of like we say this all the time, and this is going to be, you hear the saying like 70% of statistics are made up, but by our math and by a lot of the folks that we trust in terms of doing some of the research studies we've done, the cannabis purchasing population today, in terms of folks that are visiting dispensaries, is representative of like around 30% of what it will be like 5 years from now, when I'm not going to keep dogging on my parents, but like when my parents are more comfortable to go to dispensaries, right? And so like the large subset of consumer base isn't really even here yet. So I can't imagine that, at least in our lifetime, it would ever be able to put a big enough dent, because like there'll still be limits on growing yourself, right? You can't create like a full scale craft brewery without like a liquor license or an ability to do so. I think we'll see that same type of no one's going to be doing it at scale for profit in a way that's like going to damage the amount of money that's to be made by the companies doing it in the space, from what I would imagine.
Well, and definitely not any more so than it's happening now, right?
Right.
As the illicit market starts to dwindle and legal sales start to pick up over that next 5-year period, as you're talking about, the people who aren't paying for pot right now aren't going to be paying for pot then either. They'll be growing it themselves. The people who need it medic and can't afford it otherwise, they're going to figure out a way to grow it themselves and make the RSO just like they were before. So, to John's point, is realistically, they're not affecting the sales right now either. What we are hoping for is that the laws allow for these people, both medically and recreationally, people who want to take care of themselves financially, speaking, it's expensive to go to the dispensary and pay all these taxes and pay all this other homage to these brands and that kind of stuff. We get it. If you want to grow your own, you can do that. And hopefully it passes in that fashion. But those people were probably going to grow their own in the first place. When it comes down to people who treat themselves medically with this plant, more than likely they're doing it already, and or we're going to be of that mind anyway. So really, I think those people will just not uh, it'll expand, and more people will like to grow in smaller communities. Um, will extend from it and that kind of stuff. But long and the short is, uh, right now that's happening anyway. And the stuff that's affecting the market the most is really the illicit and organized crime market, the bigger makers of that. And I think when we're talking about home grow and or home brew or that type of thing, we're talking about people who are doing it for fun and or to offset some bills and or to stay away from big pharma and those types of people that they've always wanted to stay away from, such as, hey, this guy over here.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it kind of remains to be seen. There's a lot to unpack there. I'm very very curious to see how it all shakes out. But and again, talking about like our little T chart we were talking about earlier with pros and cons.
Yeah.
To take it back to the early schooling days, right? It's just I have such a hard time believing that there's really any sort of negative impact societally. Period. There's not even really any trade-offs. Like it's not like cannabis being legal makes it more accessible to kids. I can tell you right now that they collect more PII data at dispensaries in terms of like fake ID scanning and not allowing underage folks into there than any bar you've ever been to. And it's not like fake IDs are even a thing in terms of like being able with how great, and Jason, this is obviously in your world because you understand from the technical lens. It's just technology has gotten too far advanced to where like it doesn't make it any more accessible for kids to get it if you're able to get cannabis legally in the general sense, right? Not any more easy than it is for a kid to go grab beer out of their fridge in the garage to steal it from their parents, or as we found out, pharmaceuticals and opioids and OxyContin and everything like that. Probably shouldn't mention particular things on air like that, but you know what I'm saying though, right? It's all there's not really any downside at this point from like considering like what we're dealing with societally in general.
Yeah, a lot of the downside that was kind of brought up was more on the law enforcement side, which doesn't make sense, and they kind of clarified that they think the enforcement of like driving under the influence and things like that is going to be a lot of extra work and things like that, but the amount of law enforcement time that's taken to enforce the illegal cannabis being illegal is going to offset that completely, and the amount of people that are incarcerated that are that are in the jails, that in itself budget wise is going to offset it as well. So even everything that's been brought up as far as a negative kind of is easily kind of disproven.
Yeah, 1000%.
Well, and as here we grow wicked, it was alluding to, there's greed involved in them trying to shut down home grows and do that kind of thing. But long and the short is, as he alludes to earlier, he was taught by his dad to grow. This is legacy stuff. You learn from a friend who's in the business. You learn about it outside of these different things, and really the biggest point about it is the safety that comes along with the legality and the decriminalization behind it. Really, again, those who grow it, they've made the choices already, and I made the choice, and those who have home grows are choosing to grow it for themselves for whatever reason it is, medical, financial, anything, and they should be allowed to do it. Ultimately, again, the point of what this tangent is it's not going to affect the legal market. The legal market itself is opening up to the people who have been not making the choice to grow at home, not doing this medically, or just learning about it for the first time, whether they be baby boomers or they be people who are just turning 21, So yeah, I got to agree with what John said. Is ultimately the biggest fight the legal market has is the illicit market. And maybe you didn't say that. I got to agree with you that the home grow won't affect the legal market. Mm-hmm. My point is that the illicit market is the biggest thing affecting the legal market, and that doesn't have to do with home grow in my eyes, or medical grows, or anything to do with that.
So the lowering of the tax rate, how much do you think that would affect the balance of illicit and the legal market?
anytime there's an opportunity to make small businesses more successful, I think it's going to help kind of eradicate some of the folks that aren't playing by the same set of rules. The difficult thing with like the tax rate is like, and I think we've talked about this on the show a few times, the more difficult you make it for businesses to succeed from like a P&L standpoint, it's very, very difficult to sustain any type of success or even stay open unless you have very deep pockets. And a lot of times that comes with relinquishing portions of a company to folks that may not have the same passion for the cannabis industry. They're just, they see the fact that, cannabis is estimated to do 70 billion, I think by like, 2030 and like top line globally. Right. And so like the more industrious types see that and they're like, yeah, absolutely. I want to get my money involved there because if nothing else, you kind of fail forward. And that really starts to squeeze out some of the folks that are in it for the right reasons, as I would consider to be the right reasons, at least. Cause really, at the end of the day, like people that are trying to make money aren't wrong. Right. They just have a different approach than those that are there, like a Sweet Leaf Joe that's riding his 10-speed around NorCal, delivering free cannabis to patients that need it. You know what I mean? There's just a very different approach there. And in my perfect world, I just would love to see an opportunity for all of those groups to be successful. And I think lower taxes is a big step in that direction, because taxes, as we all know, impact the common person far greater than those that are far more affluent, I should say, in that sense. Right. And so that's an even bigger foundational thing that we don't need to dive into right now. But the principle is still kind of the same.
Right. Yeah, with the federal taxes coming into play, I've heard a couple of different things that they've got to regulate it. If they're going to do it federally, they've got to do one sort of tax federally and then erase these exorbitant state excise taxes. They've got to make it like a normal state tax that normally they would contribute on that, or else, you're going to tax it to death. What do they want? 25% still on this other bill?
Which that's the tough thing. It's tough to say in a government that we set up to govern itself and keep itself in check between state and federal government, right, for federal to step in and tell them how they can tax a program, right? That's a way steeper uphill battle than most people would realize, or even maybe not even possible. And again, like there's just, I don't want to be not optimistic, but I think like that is also an advantageous thing of passing something now. It's only going to continue to be more disparate in terms of where we're trying to head federally and where we're at from a state side of things. And it's going to be more back like tracking essentially to make it to where these states that have taken the risk earlier on to get involved with the cannabis program and have taken the like time and resources and taxpayer dollars to set up these programs to just undo all of that. It's not going to fall on the most positive of, and I'm not saying it shouldn't happen. I'm just talking about the reality of it happening. You know what I mean? Right. That's where state and federal government try and stay out of each other's yard as much as possible and that type of stuff, from what I understand. But interesting to see for sure.
Yeah. Well, I saw James down here comment, yeah, maybe a little bit in Cali, but each state is different, and I know that we got Philip ringing in from Texas, and Laura just said she's in Texas too. On the other side of this, we're talking about states that have legalization and have medical programs. And what does this mean? What does this bill mean to the states that don't have anything implemented yet? I mean, what could it mean? And I know we're shedding opinion on this, and we can't speak for the governors, Governor Abbott, anybody in place. But let's take Texas, for instance. What does this bill look like for them, if you care to weigh in on it, And,
I mean, at least in my opinion, it's always going to be up to the state as to whether they want to have like a cannabis supported program in this lifetime, right? Like obviously the federal decriminalization changes things from one arm of our legal system, but from the state level, like for example, I grew up, like you mentioned, Texas. I grew up in Kansas, right? Like very similar situation. At least Texas has this weird medical loophole and all. I mean, they're getting there at least, whereas Kansas is like still trying to get it on the bill for medical. And it's like, and to me, if you're waiting too long as a state, I might have mentioned this before, but like Kansas, for example, being right next to Missouri, that's probably going to go adult use and maybe go adult use in the next year, right? And they don't even have a medical program yet. for them to pass a medical program when Missouri or somewhere like Oklahoma has an adult use program, to think that as much as we like to think people aren't going to drive across state lines with cannabis, they're absolutely going to. Not that I would ever advocate for that. I should say that you should not do that. That being said, that's going to happen. And all those folks that would normally have to go get a medical card and go get involved in the medical cannabis program won't have to do that anymore. They just drive to Oklahoma or Missouri. And so like, you're almost like behind the 8 ball so far that like, you might as well not even waste time passing a medical program if you haven't passed one already. At least in my, I shouldn't say that, like, but like it's a practice in futility a little bit because it's been so much time has passed, and like in the outlook of that. Now, again, I should also like harp on the fact that that's just my own personal opinion based on my own experiences, right? It's not what I think should happen. It's just what I think most likely, given the state of the state, that's what's got the highest likelihood of happening in that scenario.
Right, definitely. You know, when it comes down to it, and this one, Jason, I want to throw it this way first, is right now we're governed on a state by state level, right? The brands, there's no interstate commerce, there's no anything like that. You know, do you think the government at all has in mind anything about this type of thing as they're looking at it? Do you think, Jason, as far as interstate commerce and building of brands and allowing for these things to happen, or what do you think as far as, well, this is a states' rights bill, right? More act, so it allows people to opt in. Does it stay as to where it is, and it's grow it in the state and disperse it in the state, or do you think interstate commerce comes in?
You know, right now there's not much benefit for brands on it. Like there's not like something on the federal level that looks like it's brand support. I mean, we're far away from that. It's just the legalization, decriminalization part of it. But I mean, you know, even in an illegal state, you know, a lot of investors and people who are starting businesses, you know, there is that fear still that, I mean, technically it's illegal. You know, even in a legal state, you can be shut down or whatever. It's federally illegal technically, right? Once you kind of release that stigma, you'll see a lot more movement. I think especially, you know, coming from the tech background, on the technical side, you know, once you can do more of a national level tech campaign, a lot of the big players, you know, don't really want to invest in some large scale like an Amazon or something like that because of the legality issue and because of the state to state issue. It's a headache. Anybody that has a brand that's doing multi-state knows that every state is a headache in itself because of the regulation. But you know, there's always that fear that it's you know, it's still illegal. But if you allow state to state and you open those borders up and it's legal, I think even on the technological standpoint of, you know, ordering processes and things like that will be huge. You know, it'll just kind of open the floodgates to that side of it. But then going back to your question, as far as, you know, the government, I mean, right now, because the overall consensus to me is, hey, we want this to be illegal. Okay, well, people need it for medicinal use and it should be legal. It should be their choice. Okay, we'll make it legal with a lot of rules. But you know, in order to make everybody happy, let's collect a bunch of money. So, you know, it's like, you know, let's tax everybody and so we can benefit for people who are actually doing that. That's not really a way to create a foundation for a thriving, you know, sector. So but in the eyes of, you know, government, they're benefiting from the taxes. And we talked about this last week as how, in my opinion, it's like it doesn't really matter to them because the demand is created by the consumer. You know, if one company goes down, the consumer can find another brand and buy from them and things like that. Even though there's some loyalty and people have kind of their favorite brands, it's at the end of the day, they want cannabis and they'll find it somehow. So I think they know that. So there's not really an incentive to allow some of these brands to flourish and take the next step and you know, broaden their kind of horizons. It's if you could get a lot of turnover and then they'll still get the taxes that are coming in. They'll still get the benefit from seeing the tax. They'll still get the benefit of hey, the consumers are getting their product, you know, things like that. So I think we're a couple steps away from, you know, seen it where businesses are now going to be like benefited, which is unfortunate. But I that's kind of what I see. I don't know what's your opinion on that, John?
It's there's a couple parts to that, but I think relatively you're pretty spot on. I think at least until there is like even when interstate commerce is allowed, like for example, I live in Oregon now, and Oregon a couple years back, it was the ability, like the state legislature here allowed the ability if states were to accept in like an emergency order, like because we had such an oversupply of cannabis that we could sell cannabis across state lines to other states that have programs, right? And I could be butchering the way I'm explaining that. Point being is if I'm California and my price, or Nevada, for example, my price per pound on the wholesale level is $3,000 a pound, and people are only getting $1,000 in Oregon per pound for weed that's, or I should say cannabis, that is like also super high quality and inexpensive and easy to get to. Like, why would we want to drive down our price per pound in the state of Nevada as a business by taking in all this really great, really inexpensive cannabis from another state? And so like people will still have to like accept and receive that, right? And like, and say that they're going to allow other states to sell into their particular market. And so like where that does make sense is places like Illinois, right? Where there was such a shortage for such a long period of time, and you'd walk into a dispensary, you'd wait 2 hours to get in, and there'd be like 3 different types of flower on the shelf, and you're limited to purchasing an eighth per customer so that they can serve everybody. And you're paying $90 and 8 taxes out the door. You know what I mean? So like, it'll just be very interesting to see. I can say this confidently. There are very few non-endemic endemic brands out there in the cannabis space today. There's like the Taco Bells and the large recognized brands that are recognized globally don't really exist, even in like from legal market to legal market. Now there are those instances where like you got the Cookies of the world and those folks that are that's probably the most non-endemic endemic brand out there, and we're lucky enough to work with them, right? But the replication that it takes to do that across state lines with different testing regulations, different go-to-market strategy you have to implement between like how you can market your particular product, right? Like even down to like the animations that are on packaging from like a regulation standpoint. Those are the things that make it difficult to scale. And as those barriers to entry lower, you'll start to see those more institutional brands arise that are able to replicate that success across state lines. So it's just a matter of like the scales have to tip at a certain point, and that would be some of the first things to follow. As that's one of the reasons why in cannabis today, it's very difficult to be successful in more than one state, because you're ultimately like building different businesses. It's not like they may be under the same like brand from an umbrella standpoint, but you're really building different businesses that are like taxed differently, regulated differently, probably using different systems, unless you're using a great company that knows how to do that across state lines. And so it's like, that's all part of it for sure.
Whole supply chains all mixed up on a whole different level, and anything cannabis related is a new supply chain state to state. And right. So, if I want to get to the payments part of this is earlier I saw George Zip mention something about safe banking, right? And I know we're talking about the MORE Act right now, but how much do you think from the payment side of things, it requires the Safe Banking Act to be in place before interstate commerce and that type of brand regulation happens? Do you think?
Mandatory.
Right.
And for this industry to hit any higher level of like scale, or any greater level of scale than what we're at today, it's required that people are able to bank in a meaningful way, and not have to like to my mama's dismay, man. When I had that first cultivation, I can't tell you how many $100,000 backpacks I drove to Nevada Power and Energy in North Vegas at 5 p.m. because we'd missed a $17,000 power bill. And you're standing there carrying a backpack, just hoping that people don't recognize you as the person that's always bringing backpacks and feeding 20s into a machine. Like those are things that very real exist today in the world. And from like a safety standpoint, let alone, like we say this all the time, like dispensaries, depending on what their cash flow situation is and how they manage their money, are at a way higher risk for any sort of like crime, not just because they're in cannabis. And that's what people miss, that it's not the cannabis that attracts illegal activity. It's the incredible amount of cash that people have on site. because that's like, what do you do with your money there? So like, you can't really, there's where I say there's like no limit to what can happen in the cannabis industry. The limit really exists. The glass ceiling is our ability to like bank with financial institutions that are going to take cannabis money. And then to Jason's point earlier, from a taxation side of things, not treat it like it's such a high risk transaction in a way that, like, the banks, obviously, from like, how we manage your money, the rates that are out there are absurd today, and some of the credit unions, stuff like that. And so interesting to see, like, the big four, right, without naming names, in terms of like financial institutions, how they're going to approach that one safe banking. Is I'm sure they've talked about it. I'm sure they've socialized things. I'm very curious behind closed doors, like what types of strategies those big financial institutions have put in place to like roll out, and at what capacity when safe banking inevitably does pass. That's the big question.
Definitely. Well, and it's gone from them joking about it for how many years now, and in regards to cannabis and banking and all that kind of stuff. Now they got to get serious about it. Now they've got to be ready for this. So it's to be a fly on a wall in some of those board meetings coming up. That would be pretty interesting to see what they think is the way to handle. Because if you grew up, in the metric system, and you were anywhere from junior high to high school, you were part of marijuana math club, right? And really the banking system has to figure out how to do all this type of stuff. There's an element to it, and Dutchy and companies like yourself out there helping with the payment, helping with this, I'm sure are going to be integral into that part, and to playing a part into that as well.
Totally.
But yeah. So again, for those joining us, we're here talking about how the House passed the MORE Act. MORE Act is why am I blanking on it now? It's the marijuana. Why am I blanking on what the MORE Act is? Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. And originally it was put forth by the House Judiciary Committee Chairman Gerald Nadler, and just passed, I think earlier you made mention to the number, John, and it passed 220 to 204.
Yep.
So again, for those of you just joining us, that's what the topic of the day's been about, and figuring out how that might play out in your neck of the woods when it comes down to this. There's states that have it passed. There's states that have already opted in, but realistically, there's states that just have medical. And there's states that have people living in them that have all sorts of different needs and wants and wills to be free and not be burdened with thinking they're doing the wrong thing by participating with this plan. And whether it's a way you choose to enjoy yourself recreationally, or it's something that makes your daily life better because of some sort of ailment or something like that, you shouldn't have to bear the burden of thinking that you're doing the wrong thing. And right now, what's on the table and what just passed the House is something that could lighten that burden and actually start taking the narrative a different direction. And yeah, it's interesting to see. And everybody in the comments has been amazing. Thank you for being over there. I saw Laura from Texas and Chris out there throwing some love to us, and thank you very much for that. But our comment section has been lit recently. Everybody's out there, and thank you guys for participating. So yeah, I don't know what else do we got. I know that I was looking at Marijuana Moment. Love those guys over there. We've been sponsors of their newsletter for the last 3 months, and really love the news they put out there on top of everything over there. But after the House approved the marijuana bill, the 3 next stories were Washington Treasurer urges colleagues in other states to pressure Congress to pass marijuana banking bill. That was 2 hours ago. And then Maryland lawmakers just officially put marijuana legalization on the ballot, also sending implementation bill to the governor. And everybody's talking about it right now. So it's a good time to join the conversation. And yeah, James, it's as you said, the optimism is in the fact that it's in the news again and it passed again. And realistically, whether it's this iteration or a different iteration that appeases more people and gets to pass the next, it's happening more and more, and people are talking about it more and more. And just like on that last little bit, where we were talking about with John, on the banks, they're having to figure out a way to implement a strategy for this. And like we're talking about with Jason, is as uncomfortable as traditional markets are getting, they're going to have to get with the times on this. They're only going to be able to hold that castle door for so much longer. We're banging on the door. And
I mean, when you think about like the macro, it's like the folks that are saying the right thing, they're talking about the injustices that this has the opportunity to undo and help make amends with, or make better, right? The only leg left standing of those that are against it are trying to say that cannabis is bad for you, right? And it's like, can we be any more subjective with our reasons as to why, when I can tell you that after being overseas for 2 weeks and looking at a Heinz ketchup bottle in Europe versus here, I can tell you that we've got about 20 additional ingredients in our ketchup that do not exist in ketchup in EU, and probably 10 of those are banned like food additives in EU, right? So like, where are we really drawing our lines here? That's like, and I guess like, I don't know if it's not that someone's not making that argument somewhere, but like, we're in a position in life where we're choosing lesser of evils every single day, right? Nothing is ever going to get you exactly to where you want to be, because we're all so like instantly connected, and like we live in a society of like instant gratification where you can have answers immediately, right? So like this type of like, I won't even, dare I even call it like a filibuster at this point, because like where's the logic behind that, right? Like Jason's point to like not being able to test for like intoxication with drivers and stuff like that, that's probably the most valid. I would say that's toward the top of the list for sure. Because like when we talk about like, I know when we had Maha on a couple weeks ago, right? You know, how many times when you see on the news drunk driving accident, do they mention the bar they were at? Versus if somebody leaves a cannabis consumption lounge and gets in an accident, best believe that name will be in the news and that they will vilify that company or location for that reason, right? And so it's like, it's just all very hypocritical to me, and it's almost laughable. And I wonder like at what level we're having those conversations. But we'll see. You know, it remains to be seen. I hope I live to be proven wrong, and I truly appreciate when I am. So I hope that I'm incorrect. This is going to pass. But like, I think those are like, we're at the tail end of the fight in terms of making it happen, because like you said, we're knocking at the door. It's not going to go away. But at the same time, it's like when your last line of defense is cannabis is bad for you, and it's like, really? It's like, really? I was like, do you want to unpack that a little bit in terms of things that are just completely legal today that are quote unquote bad for you in the same ways that you think cannabis is? Okay. So like, again, it's like, it's towards the tail end of that. Hopefully.
Nice. Yeah. Well, yeah, hopefully. Yeah. Cause the marijuana madness it's maddening, right? It's getting tired of hearing the same thing over and over with no proof to it, and really just so much else out there to choose from that could do worse for you, you know? So yeah. Well, Jason, anything else you wanted to bring up?
No, I think that covers it. I think everything is it's momentum. It's all about momentum. There's a lot of momentum going on, a lot of talks going in different facets of cannabis, and they're all going towards the positive. So I think it's a train that's moving forward, and hopefully nothing gets in its way.
Yeah.
Agreed. Very well said.
Yeah, well, again, thanks for everyone in the comments. We've been live on TikTok as well, so everybody that's been there, we don't have a moderator yet. So if it seemed lonely in the comments, I apologize. This is our first time trying to broadcast it to TikTok there, but we appreciate your participation over there. Everybody here in YouTube land, hey, we really enjoy everybody that tunes into our page. Got a lot of our basically our usuals here, and the people who frequent the page a lot, and we always appreciate your support and tuning in on all the morning buzzes and the weekly roll-ups and all of our podcasts. We thank you very much for joining in. But yeah, the more act passes the House. I'm sure next week we'll have a lot more to figure out federally speaking, and Steve Hawkins will be joining us again from the USCC. So I'm really excited to see what his point of view is and what rolls out in Washington this next week. But in addition to here, just remember that we'll be putting the link to the app in our description, and we've had a pretty good discussion going on the app, on the Trichomes app as well. Just recently, Jason put out a post today when they were voting on it and on the floor, and had some people spark that conversation up. But yeah, look for that in the description, and make sure to join the conversation over on our app. And thanks again, everybody, for joining on this Friday. John, great to have you back and with us here. I look forward to hearing some personal tales and how it was over there. But yeah, he came back just in time for the good stuff here.
Totally. Like you said, I hope it's kind of like the whole like bringing good weather with you thing. So we'll see. Maybe I brought some positive vibes back from overseas. So we'll see. But it's great to be back and great to hang out today, man.
Yeah. And hey, Jason, thanks again. It's been a pleasure having you as an addition to the show. I'm really excited about where this show is going. We've got a few other people lined up in the April month to come and join us and to bring some things beside federal legalization talk, or to fill some space in between. But again, everybody joined us today. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Be safe and enjoy yourselves.